I grew up playing story-based games, so when I got into VR gaming, I've always gravitated towards the same types of games. However, sometimes I don't have the time or the patience to sink into a game that's going to take me upwards of 20 hours to finish, especially if I'm using the Quest because then I'm limited by battery life. Every once in a while, I'll pick up a game where I can finish the campaign in a couple of hours just to get a new experience. If that sounds like you, I got you covered. Here are the 10 best VR games you can finish in under 3 hours. Most of the games on this list are fairly cheap, but if you're looking for a discount code from MetaQuest, I got you covered. Check the links in the description. Number 10, Stones of Harlath. If you're a borderline boomer like me, there's a good chance you might have played some old dungeon crawlers growing up. Games like Eye of the Beholder, Might and Magic. Harlath feels like a throwback to games just like that. This is a 2D pixel art dungeon crawler where most of your attacking is done with gesture-based spells that run using a mana meter. It's a fairly basic RPG, there's no elaborate leveling system or anything like that, and it's a game I'd say you finish in about 3 hours. But each dungeon is unique, there's a pretty decent variety of enemies, all the boss fights are pretty cool, the spells are really interesting, it's just a fun way to kill a few hours. Now if you're a graphics snob and you favor highly realistic graphics, definitely steer clear of this and hopefully the footage is telling you that. If you like this art style but you prefer it in 3D, you should know that the developer, Garage Collective, is working on a new game called Dragon Rage, but all the pixel art is now in 3D. Check that out on our YouTube channel, I'll link it down below. Number 9, Freediver Triton Down. For the now defunct studio Ark and Ade, this is a game that you'll absolutely finish in about an hour. My first playthrough was about 45 minutes long. You play as a freediver, meaning you can go diving underwater just by holding your breath without the use of an oxygen tank. In this game, you are trapped on a ship that is quickly sinking to the bottom of the ocean, and you have to swim through passageways, open up doorways, and clear obstacles to be able to escape before you actually drown. There's a small supernatural element to this, and if you're someone like me who is thalassophobic, meaning you have a fear of deep water, this game can get pretty intense. Again, unfortunately, the studio behind this game, Ark and Ade, did shut down in 2024, so we're not going to see a follow-up to this, which is a shame because the sci-fi elements that kind of get teased throughout the story, I was hoping to see followed up in a later game. At number 8 is Dreadhalls, and this one's a classic. This one came out way back in 2016. Unlike Stones of Harlath, this one has a bit more of a horror element to it. You start this game trapped inside this absolutely massive dungeon, and the only way you can survive is just with stealth and with speed because you're not really armed with any weapons when you first start the game. There is treasure to be found in this game, but most of it is going to be stuff to help keep you alive because again, there is a supernatural and a bit of a horror element to this. So if you like a more intense dungeon crawler, but again you don't have a ton of time, go grab this one, you should finish it in about 3 hours. At number 7 is Ark and Ade. Imagine you were playing a 1980s light gun shooter at an arcade, and then suddenly you find yourself sucked inside that world, and now you're in the game itself trying to survive. This is an on-rails bullet hell shooter, and even though they're using low poly and the enemies and everything don't have a lot of detail, every level feels distinct and unique, all the boss fights are very different and a lot of them are really fun, and it's just honestly a good time. Again, this is kind of like a throwback to games I used to play when I was a kid. Unless you die a whole lot like I did, you'll probably finish Ark and Ade in about an hour and a half. There are also collectibles that you can shoot that when you come back to the real world, you can actually see them on your shelf. So that gives you reason to replay the game after you finish it. At number 6 is Robo Recall. There are going to be a lot of people mad at me that this game is not higher on the list, but frankly I don't think it's really aged very well because of the motion system. In Robo Recall, you're basically a cop who's been called in to quell a robot uprising. The great thing about this game are the mechanics. Instead of just shooting robots, which turns out being a lot of fun in and of itself, you can actually rip their limbs off, and there's no shortage of fun to be had when you can rip the arm off of a robot and then beat it to death with its own hand. The game plays out very arcadey where you'll have different objectives in different areas, like sometimes you have to teleport a certain number of robots through a portal that leads Lord knows where, sometimes you have to defeat a certain number of enemies, sometimes you have to defend a battery or generator or something like that. And the reason I say this game hasn't aged well is because unless you use mods on PCVR, this game is teleport only, you can't even stick turn. So that's something that in 2025, people who are used to free movie locomotion games like I was when I first played this, it'll take a bit of getting used to, and it does feel a bit dated. But I can't deny that the action, the mechanics, all that stuff is a lot of fun. And number 5 is Anshar Wars 2. One of my favorite franchises growing up is Star Fox, and I was begging to find a game like that in VR. This doesn't quite scratch that itch, but it comes pretty close. You're a pilot caught up in an intergalactic war, and before anyone says I can't play this because I can't handle all the flight, this game does have a third-person mode, meaning you can play with the ship actually in front of you. The first time I played this game, that's actually how I had to play it because first person was a bit too much for me. I didn't really have my VRC legs yet, so the first time I did a barrel roll in the cockpit, I almost lost my lunch, but playing it in third person, I was perfectly fine. There's a ton of different missions here. Some of them are in space, some of them take place on different planets. You'll find yourself in dogfights against a bunch of planes. Sometimes you have to destroy a certain number of bases. Sometimes you have to speed through a tunnel before the doors close. There's a lot of variety packed into this game, even though it's about 2.5 hours old. And number 4 is The Secret of Retropolis. I am talking about the first game here, not the second one that released last year. Imagine a 1930s gumshoe detective noir. Now imagine that in the future, where robots are the sole inhabitants of the world because all of humankind has died out. That's the basis of this game. You play as a detective who just flatly tells you at the start of the game that he doesn't really like to move, and he uses his extendo robot arms to do anything he has to accomplish to solve his cases. That turns this to a bit of a point and click puzzle game where you have to interact with different things in the environment to be able to accomplish your objectives and move on. The game's roughly an hour long start to finish. It does have multiple endings, and like I said, it does have a sequel. I had a blast playing this. Like I said, it's just about an hour, and I can't wait to play the sequel, which I'm told is significantly longer. At number 3 is Pistol Whip. This is an excellent first-person shooter rhythm game where you're going to score more points if you're shooting the enemies in tune to the beat. Now there is an endless amount of content here in form of like weekly challenges, achievements, leaderboards. So when I say short VR games in this context, I'm specifically talking about the 2 campaign modes in the game right now. Those are 2089 or Smoking Thunder. It's an excellent game that I don't think gets its just due because it kind of hovers between rhythm game and shooter, so people in both fandoms don't really want to commit to either. But it's constantly being updated by the developers. It has a very active community around it. It is on rails, meaning there's artificial movement, but it moves silky smooth. It's a ton of fun, and frankly, you're moving and dodging and ducking so much that you don't really notice the world moving around you. You're just trying to keep yourself alive. It's an excellent game. And number 2 is A Fisherman's Tale. This is a puzzle-based game that you'll finish in about 2 hours, and it's kind of hard to describe this game. You're playing as a puppet fisherman who's living in a lighthouse. Inside your house is a model of your lighthouse with a smaller version of you. You quickly learn that you yourself are a puppet living in a lighthouse model of a much bigger version of yourself. So it's like those Russian nesting dolls where there's a big one and then you just see an increasingly small one come out of it. It's kind of like that. You solve puzzles by manipulating your environment, knowing that your smaller version and your bigger version are all going to mimic your movements. So for instance, if you remove a wall or pick up a seashell or something like that in the model in front of you, the bigger version of you is going to do the same thing in your lighthouse. It's one of the most creative puzzle games I've ever played in a video game, period. I'm not just talking about VR here, I'm talking about puzzle games as a whole. This is one of the most creative ones I've ever played. This game also does have a sequel, another Fisherman's Tale or Fisherman's Tale 2, depending on which platform you're on. That game's about 5 hours long and it changes up the gameplay entirely, but it's no less creative. I cannot recommend these games enough, especially if you're looking for a less intense experience in VR. Number 1, Star Wars Vader Immortal. This is a 3-episode miniseries that takes place shortly after Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, so sometime after Star Wars Episode 3. I openly admit I'm a massive Star Wars nerd, so being able to just hold a lightsaber in my hand and have Darth Vader standing directly in front of me is one of the coolest things I've ever done in virtual reality. Each episode is about 45 minutes long, so you complete the entire story in about 2.5 hours. In addition to that, there's a lightsaber challenge mode built in each game. You start out with the lightsaber, but eventually you learn from Vader how to use the Force, and you can start stealing the stormtroopers' guns to use those against them. Again, as a massive Star Wars nerd, this is one of the best experiences I've ever had in virtual reality. I play this every single May for May the 4th be with you. And between this and Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, I would say that this is the better Star Wars experience, even if it's more like an interactive experience more so than a full-fledged game. It's still outstanding. Let me know if you played any short VR experiences that I may have missed. I love making lists like these because it opens people up to games that they may not have heard of. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.